Hey there, everyone. It's Andy Baker here, and I'm back with another episode of the Creative AI Podcast. And this week, I decided that in an AI world utterly consumed with vibe coding, I needed to have a conversation with somebody who could walk me through the world of coding. That person, Ryan Lane, who shares his extensive experience in tech, particularly in coding and design, and discusses the transformative role of AI in these fields. He explores how AI tools like Copilot assist developers, the importance of understanding APIs, and the implications of AI on creativity and learning. The discussion also examines the challenges AI faces in understanding context and the intersection of AI with art, particularly in photography. One highlight, we talk about Ryan's experiments with AI tools, emphasizing the importance of understanding and utilizing these technologies to foster creativity. The discussion also touches on the future of creativity in a world increasingly influenced by AI, highlighting the balance between innovation and the human touch in artistic endeavors. Ryan is my favorite sort of creator, always experimenting and iterating, and I think you'll find his insights invaluable. All right, so I am on here with Ryan Lane. I just met him, but he is fascinating. He is doing all kinds of interesting stuff with AI. And so brought him on here today to kick things around, learn some stuff. So as I tend to start these things with, introduce yourself, let the audience know who you are, how you got to where you are, and we'll just run from there.
Sounds good. Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Andy. This was fun chatting with you before to kind of get an idea what this was all about. But let's talk about me, I guess, a little bit. It's always weird. So I've worked in tech for, 30 years now. So it's a long time. Guess I'm getting up there. So I'm one of those weirdos that has done design and development. So I write code and do design work, and I've always kind of melded those two things together wherever I can. Kind of makes me a little bit different in the tech space. They used to even call us unicorns when we did this stuff, but now it's more common, thankfully, to find people that are doing that, because so many design tools have development integrated into them these days, or you got to custom write your own plugins, even for like Figma. So it's interesting to see people, broadening their horizons and their skill sets and using AI now. So it's like a part of the task.
Well, what's interesting to me when it comes to the coding side of things, people have talked about AI as being particularly good in that area, that some of the tools are making real leaps there. Mm-hmm. And making it accessible, because I've played with all the writing tools new ones are coming out every week, and the video tools, but I have not yet been able to bring myself. I look at all the demos, and I'm at that curiosity phase where I'm like, okay, should I start vibe coding? Should I play with this tool? Because I've always marveled at two particular groups. One, visual artists blow me away. I've never had that skill. I see things visually and I write, but I can't create it, and I so desperately want to. And coding, because I played around with it back in the day with, like Texas Instruments, where I was coding and putting things on cassette tapes, right? But was just horribly terrible at it.
Yeah, we've gotten better at, thankfully, in that tech. So.
Yes, it is much easier now, but you combine those skill sets, and there's always been art in the design and design in the art. I know you've worked in I have a friend who also works in user interfaces and designing, because that is both code and it is very human, right? Because
exactly.
You have to have empathy to be able to understand the experience. So when it comes to tools that you've used and embraced, so you've been in and around this world, but what called to you? How did you make that leap? And since your coding was already in your life, so the barrier of entry is lower, like it was for writing tools for me. Mm-hmm. And I want to play around with the coding tools, but I guess tell me why I should.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's I think started actually playing around with them pretty early on, and the early LLMs that would kind of try to help you out. And there was little code examples, and they were pretty good at it even then, of looking at your code or asking it to write you code, and it could get it to create things. But initially I was trying to use it more like in programming. There's a terminology like talking to a rubber duck or rubber ducking. It's sometimes you just need to sound, You just need to say it out loud to somebody, or in this case, an inanimate object, or an AI, a literal inanimate object, but they can talk back. So it's kind of weird in that sense. And so you can like say, like, I'm coding this, and this is what I have. And with the tools now, they're really good at this, where it can analyze it and say, like, oh, like this could be a problem. This particular way you're solving this could lead to a race condition down the road, or this could receive a bad data type. You haven't handled that. So it's just kind of nice as like this expert developer who has all of this code knowledge to some degree there for you to like be a sounding board off of what you're doing. And I find that is how I use it the most still, is to say, like, I'm doing these tasks and I'm writing my code, but I want a little help. Like, I want you to help me solve like this specific problem, or like, what is the more like correct way to do this? Like, maybe I want to say, I want to do some parsing of some data, and I've done it a million times, but like, save me some effort. Like, go back through and tell me how to parse this data under this way and make sure I'm doing it correctly. So, helping you with those repetitive tasks, just probably like you would with writing or you would with design. You're saying, I want these tools to kind of enable it to help to be there for me, even though they're really powerful now, where you could say, like, write me a program from the ground up that does this. And if you tell it right, it can, in most cases, do that. And that's, it's a little bit scary from a professional standpoint, because you're like, oh, this thing's like can take my job, I guess, in some sense. But the other sense, you look at it and you're like, oh, well, you still need to know what it's doing. Like, you couldn't just have it do this and then just push this out into production and use it live. Like, that would be ridiculous. So I guess there's still some nice constraints in there, but that's why I've been trying to use it as my personal assistant, and it's an interesting effort in that.
I mean, certainly you hear a lot of people talk about that, whatever the field, saying, like, it feels like I have a really powerful grad student at my side helping me here, or many of them. And what they come back with isn't perfect. It's like, okay, you have some decent ideas here, but going to have to work on that. I could even give you some feedback and you can go on and work on it some more and then come back to me. Mm-hmm. Chat GPT. But one of the things you touched on there when it comes to designing programs, I read something just this last couple of days where someone was saying, now that everyone can code an app, pretty soon everyone's going to remember why making the app was never the problem. It was, what does the app do? What problem is it solving?
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, what's the idea behind it? Forget about the functionality of it. It's just, you're missing the point. Like, okay, it can help you code. Great. Mm-hmm. What are you making?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's already the problem. There's already a lot of skilled developers, and you look in the App Store, there's a lot of apps in there, and just the iOS App Store or on the Android App Store. You don't need a lot of them. And some of them are, especially in the early days, people were just like, oh, I've got to make an app because I want to make money. So I'm going to make the beer drinking app, and I'm going to make the lightsaber app. And those were fun, and they had no staying power whatsoever because you don't use them. So you could do that again now with AI. You could start just pooping out all sorts of like services and things, but does anybody need it? I mean, that's where I find it's useful. Like, I need something and I'm lazy. So help me write that so that I can have code that's just for me, or something.
Of course, I mean, you say lazy, but that leads into something that I wanted to talk about, which is when we talked before, you had talked about, okay, so you're doing some coding and then it'll sort of prompt you and say, well, I can fill that in. It's kind of like the code equivalent of a sentence finisher when you're running a Gmail or something.
Exactly, yeah.
Where
that's
it's like
Copilot works that way in Visual Studio Code. At least that's how you can turn on the extensions for that, and it'll just start offering you suggestions while you type your code, and it's very advanced, like word suggestion. It's like you're typing a function that's gonna convert these numbers or check to see if something's even. It's like, I've seen that a million times. Here you go, and it's fun how it does it, because it gives you that little light fate text version of what you want, and you're like, yep, that's what I want. So tab to complete.
Yeah, well, and what's interesting to me about that, and I could be wrong about this, because just like in writing an email or whatever, there's a certain amount of grunt work that goes into it where it's not creative, it's just informational. But at the same time, and this is one of those, as I continue to talk to people on this podcast, I'm finding there's like 5 to 7 sticking points where people have differences of opinion when it comes to using these tools for the act of creation. And one of them is, am I relinquishing too much agency? is pushing through this the point? Is having to sort of think about it as I'm writing it, even if it's grunt work, I'm still wrestling with words if I'm writing an email. I'm still wrestling with the code and having to be precise and reminding my brain why I'm doing this in the first place as I'm doing it. Does that make me better at it? Or is it better to be freed up from that so that I can use that horsepower on something else? I don't know that there's a right answer in that. I'm just kind of go ahead.
I'm not sure that there is. Yeah, I think you're right though. It is something that you think about. At least I think about it when I'm using the tools because it comes up. It's like sometimes you're like, this is too good at what it did. You're like, that's great and that's helpful, but at the same time it's a little scary. But sometimes what I find myself with the programming is if I take out some of the easy redundant tasks or the things that I've written a million times and it's good at, I'm now just focusing on the architecture, the bigger picture of like, what's fun in development. It's like, oh, I can try out some new techniques. I can try out some new ways that people try to address these problems. I can use new tools that I haven't explored yet, but I feel more comfortable because I have AI there to assist me with that. Like I was trying to learn some new API tools with Python. Never done it before, but I was like, this seems like what's what everybody's using. Looks like the right way to create a API from the ground up. So as opposed to going and reading all the documentation and learning about it, I was just like, hey, write me a real simple API that just, I send you a word and you send me back a word and using this technology. And it got me started. So I got my hello world set up really quickly. And it was what I wanted to see interact with it. So then I could build on top of that. Like in that case, it seems very powerful, but at the same time, it's like, and I'm learning, which is nice. It's like, it's teaching me still. So I'm improving my skills. I'm not just relinquishing it to it entirely.
That's interesting. And actually, do me a favor for the audience, explain what an API is. Now, again, I told you before, like I'm resistant to coding, but I run into that one all the time because people talk about, we're entering the agentic age and you're going to have, agents talking to agents and agents having to interface with the various systems on various web pages they might go to. And every single time I hear people talk about that, they're like, yeah, no, you have to be able to interact with the API. And it's like, okay, what is that? Help me.
Yeah. I mean, from an simplest view of an API, it's basically just a way for, usually in some cases, for a machine to talk to a machine. It's just it's a layer of information. So everything uses it. Like every website just about that has any interactivity is going to use an API. For example, you have a backend piece of server side that has some like a database and you want to get that data out of the database. It's just a way of saying, okay, what I want is this API endpoint, which is like a URL, just like you go into a website. You're like, but I want my customers, and it will return back the customer data. But you don't show that to your end user. So you're like, okay, I've got that customer data from the API. It's in JSON or XML or whatever crazy format you want. And then you're parsing that, and then you're turning that into your UI elements. But APIs can do other things too. They can just be sending data back and forth, submitting a form can go through an API, or like sending data back and forth can be through APIs. It's basically like the language behind the scenes of how everything communicates.
I appreciate that. The other thing I wanted to ask you about, just because I haven't played with it, because I've been playing with all of the other tools like ChatGPT and Claude and whatnot. What all can Copilot do? You just talked about it being able to help you with coding, and you hear about it as being like the biggest chunk of sort of big enterprise, agent or, sort of consumer grade AI. What tool, what is it good at? What does it need to get better at?
I mean, I mostly use Copilot for code because it's integrated with GitHub and it's integrated with the Visual Studio Code tools. So it's nice in that sense. But like at the place where I work, which is like a large internet provider, we use Copilot through a lot of our tools. So I've seen that it can be useful for like understanding, like being trained on your company's documents. So you can, as opposed to searching for things, you can ask it. You'd be like, hey, what does this acronym mean? And it'll be like, go look through the data and be like, oh, this means this. It just tells you what it knows temporarily about that. It's cool because it can kind of also learn about your emails and like your team's messages and give you information about that. We kind of turn in the knobs on that to say like, well, we don't want it to know forever. We just want it to know the stuff now, because everybody's a little worried, like how much data are you giving away at the moment? That's why I actually do personally. I use Ollama and ComfyUI for most of my stuff because I want self-hosted open source versions of these things. It's like,
Yeah, well, certainly they've made a lot of news when it was like it was going to remember, take, screenshots of your screen.
Mhm.
And you understand that is the perfect example of the double-edged sword, where it's like, okay, you can track everything and I can find anything that I ever did ever, but wait a minute, you can have everything ever, and that's perhaps a problem. But anyway, backing up a little bit, one of the things, when we talk about, the amount of helping that it might do, that taking that step back and looking at another one of those sticking points about knowing and understanding what it's doing, like why it's doing it that way. Like if it's one thing if it's finishing a sentence in email. It's another thing if it's helping you with a chunk of rudimentary code. It's another thing altogether when you have fed it a bunch of information and it's going to go do a deep research thing where it's choosing what to include and what not to include. Do I understand why and how you're choosing what you're choosing? Or going in terms of education with kids, where it's like, okay, I'm having this thing right, but do I understand why it's doing what it's doing? Do I understand the underlying skills? We are of a certain age where it's like, okay, we've been doing this for decades. We've built up the muscle memory. We understand why it's making the choices. We can understand what's good and what's not, use what's good and toss the rest aside. What happens, and I keep asking this question, and there is no good answer, but what happens when people aren't practicing the underlying skills anymore, where it's always
yeah,
counting on the AI?
I think it's tough. I think there's times where maybe you can get away with that, where you're like, well, I don't need to know this anymore. I just need something that does know it. It's like, you hire people to work for a company because you don't know that. You're like, so I'm going to go hire a guy who knows this stuff really well. I guess you can start to lean on that. But I mean, if you're taking away, hopefully you're still learning. That's what I hope. I hope that people aren't just like ignoring the output from this. Like if you're going to say like, write me my research paper, it's like you've done, it's like, well, that's maybe not great because you maybe didn't do the research, but at least I hope to God you're reading that output thoroughly through and at least retaining some knowledge and then fact checking and those types of things as well. But
It's a good point. I had a friend once that I worked with, and he had a problem with his car and was commenting that his wife questioned how much they were paying. Couldn't he try to do it? It involved an oil change and something else, filters or something. And he was like, "This is why I make money, so I can pay other people to know stuff that I don't want to know, I don't have time to know, and no interest in knowing."
and we can't all know everything. That's the best part about it. That's why you have to distribute the knowledge to other people.
Well, apologize to the AI, because the AI would say, "Yes, I do know everything. I have been trained on all human knowledge."
That's where I find the fun part is when you ask an AI to do something that it doesn't know. Like you try to have it create something like with the design tools. It's really interesting. You like give it something that you're like, and it doesn't work. You're like, you weren't trained on this, and it's kind of cool because it just fails miserably. Like it just doesn't understand.
Well, speak more to that, because we were talking before about photography and just about image generation and the difference between what it can generate when it knows versus what happens when it doesn't, and what that process is to get there.
Yeah, like I think I haven't mentioned out here, but I do wildlife photography and nature
It's
photography.
beautiful, by the way.
Yeah.
I went and then looked at some of it, and I'm a sucker for it. I hike, I go out in nature,
Exactly,
but your stuff's beautiful.
Yeah, it's my excuse to get away from the computer, but then you come back and you do editing on a computer anyways. But yeah, it's where I've learned like some of the tools like within the MMLs that do like diffusions and image generation. Some of them are pretty sophisticated around like you can even say like, oh, I want this like lighting and this style technique and this lens and this f-stop and this kind of depth of field. And you can really start to recreate a specific camera look with like a little bit of prompt engineering effort, but it can get there. Like Adobe's Firefly is really good at that. Like it kind of is scary as far as like how good it is at making it look like it was taken with a camera if you tweak the settings right. But yeah, like the stuff that I've seen is like trying to play around with not just like specific techniques, but you could ask it to say like generate a bird. I'm like, this is a bird I photographed. I'm out of curiosity. Can I get ComfyUI is one of the models I'm using to generate the same bird. And sometimes it just can't because it wasn't trained on that bird, or it has a really weird misinterpretation of it. And, it adds flourishes and design. Like, okay, it's like it's taking drawings that were maybe cartoonish along with photos, and it just mashes it all together. And you're like, it's not right. It's hard to explain what it does when it doesn't know what to do. I mean, I think a good like an example would be like, if let's say like you had a model and it had no idea what a blimp was, right? Like there was never any blimp terminology, data, or photos in the data set. And you go and you type in, I want a blimp. It's going to be like, here's some stuff. Here's something that I think that you mean, and then you could probably get into it by describing it, be like, well, it's a very large balloon, but not a hot air balloon. It's more like an egg shape, and you could probably get there, but it wouldn't be right ever. It would never really get you the desired output.
I'm sure someone has made this comparison before, but it's kind of, was it Orwell who had the story about the blind men and the elephant, and they were asked to describe it, and one was holding the tail, one held the trunk, one held the ear, and so all of their impressions, because they couldn't see the entirety of it, nor could they see what other people were holding. They all thought everyone else was crazy. But it's like, if you don't know what the thing is, you kind of fill in the story based on what you have. And that's sort of what the AI is doing, is that Orwellian, like, this is all I can go with, is what I know.
Yeah, it does its best. And sometimes it does a really great job at doing its best. You can get some interesting abstract stuff out of it. Like it's fun to play with when you're asking it to do like feelings. You're like, give me a photo of sadness, and it does a good job saying, well, here's a sad person. You're like, okay, I get that. That was an easy one.
But it's interesting that you say that in that one thing that a recent guest talked about, the idea that when it makes stuff up or it hallucinates, is that not, you could call it accidental, but it's still creativity, in that it's like, I don't have anything, but I'm going to pull together whatever elements I have to come up with something novel. And isn't that on some level a replication of what we do? When you hear the famous stories about Steve Jobs and how he talks about where he took a calligraphy class in college, and that emphasis on design informed, like, he didn't realize it when they were playing around with some of the design in like the Macintosh and the 2Es and even the fonts that they chose to use. He realized at some point, he stopped and he was like, wait a minute, this is that calligraphy class and I'm pulling on it and I didn't even know it. It's just, you draw on whatever you have.
Yeah. I think it's an interesting idea to think about the hallucination, like hallucinating state as more of it trying to creatively solve a problem. It's hard to put that kind of human thinking to it, but I mean, in some sense, it's trying to mimic the way our brains work with how it solves problems. So, I mean, I think at some point we will get there when we finally do have actual AI that has some sort of whatever we would consider consciousness or something. At that point, it's like, I would hope that it is creative, truly is allowed to be creative.
I wonder sometimes when that day comes, and I do believe it will. Certainly some of what people have said recently, you hear some people who aren't prone to dramatics saying, well, given what I've seen, I wouldn't surprise me if it ends up in 2027. It's like, whoa, okay, that's fast. But it's like, part of me is like, I hope it is beautifully creative. On the other hand, I'm like, I still want it to be special. I still want us to have something that we hang on to. But there are little moments of relinquishing of that desire to remain special, insofar as just the other day, I played something and my wife came into the room. She's like, what's that? You're listening to classical music? And I was like, I hate to break it to you, but people have been feeding classical sheet music into the system, into the LLM. And this is the sheet music it came out with. And it looks, it's that stuff where it's like, I mean, all music looks like Morse code on crack to me, but it's like this big full page with all the different instruments and it's playing as it goes. And it's like, wait a minute, this is a symphony and you composed this, AI. Like, it was just one of those moments where you're like, oh gosh.
Yeah. It's fascinating.
It's like on its way.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting, like how the tools can be used for so many things. I think that's the part that like people get upset, like, oh, it's taking away the creative work, it's doing this, but then there's like real science work that's amazing that's being done with AI. There's just so many legitimate uses that we probably haven't even discovered yet with just the current machine learning models that speed everything up. And
yeah,
I'm excited about that the most, of like how much faster we can push technology and science just with the help of these tools.
Yeah, that's where I get hopeful, deeply hopeful. And where it's like, okay, I'm going to forget about the foot race between the hopeful and the pessimistic, but just the ability, Sam Altman, who is prone to exaggeration,
For
but
sure.
he certainly has revealed a lot to be truth, because he puts out these models and you're like, okay, it was as good as you said it was going to be. But for him to say that we're going to be able to, very soon do 10 years of science in one, and not long thereafter be do 101. And you start thinking, okay, what was 500 years ago like scientifically? You're saying that we can do that in the span of 5 years, make those kinds of leaps. How exponential is this going to be? And how capable? And it just makes me very optimistic for that utopian future where, being able to help people. I mean, that's hopefully the goal. But I could talk about the philosophical all day, and I would like to come back to it, but I don't want to forget, last time we spoke, you mentioned experiments. And I don't want to miss the opportunity to hear about your experiments.
Yeah, so actually I have it on my desk here because I've been working on it again. This one's not plugged in or turned on. This is just one of my photos. Actually, it's blurring it. Of course, I should probably turn off the blur. It's a e-ink frame. This is bad audio, so I'll have to describe it more than show it to you anyways. But it just has a Raspberry Pi on the back and a little e-ink display. There's like a little circuit board on the back there, the whole microcontroller and everything. And it runs wirelessly, and I had it just real simple. I was like, experimenting with just using it as a digital picture frame at first. But then I was like, it would be interesting to have another frame that is the artist, the little sign about the art. But I was like, as a fun test, I'm like, well, I've got an Ollama server running here, so it doesn't cost me anything to have it look at my photo and describe it and then have a description. So 2 frames side by side. And so it was like one was then showing the original photo, the other was showing the description. But then I was like, oh, well, I have like 4 or 5 of these e-ink displays. And unfortunately, I haven't posted any of this stuff online yet because it's still experimental rough stage. It's like, well, take that description and now make another photo. We're using the diffusion layer stuff on my ComfyUI, so I can pass it to the API of that and just kind of start a chain of events. And it gets real kooky real fast, but it's a fun experiment to try out of just like taking my original photo, describe that photo, turn it into a new image, describe that image, turn that into another one, and just create like a VHS kind of recording of a recording sort of decay over time here.
You can't see this, listeners, but I am grinning from ear to ear because I love this. I love this. In that, what a fascinating way to go about it. I mean, I'm taken back to a house I lived in as a child, and my parents had like closets across from each other, and they both had mirrored fronts. And if you stood in the middle, you could see the streak image off into infinity.
Nice.
And it's like you have the image staring at the image. You have the device staring at the device and saying, okay, I am going to analyze this piece of art, and I have an LLM and I am looking at it, and it's like, all right, I will analyze that. And then to have another device then look at it and say, I will draw it. It becomes this game of telephone. But with the decay, like you said, because I remember when I was an undergrad taking film classes, we were filming in video, and this one guy just blew me away with his creative thinking. And he did something very similar in that he was like, okay, the teacher just said, don't film, the screen that you're filming on, it doesn't like it. And he was like, well, why doesn't it like it? What happens? And can I do anything with that? And so he was like aiming at it, and it was feedbacking off of it, but it ended up creating these patterns of colors and images where it was like this weird digital existential crisis going on in front of us. How cool is that?
Yeah, the visual feedback, just like you would get from audio feedback, but this is the visual equivalent. They even used that, I think, in the, I want to say like 70s or 80s Doctor Who opening sequence. They point the camera at the screen to make his house, because they didn't have VFX for low budget TV shows like that. I mean, everything was, if you watched it, you saw how janky it was, but that particular effect looked really good. You're like, oh, that's cool. Everything's like warping and moving around on the screen.
So in this experiment, did it get to an interesting place? Was there like a step along the way where you were like, okay, I'm a part of this, but it's become something altogether new and different?
I mean, it happens real fast. That's the thing. I was surprised. It's like 3 steps in and you're like, oh yeah, it's lost the plot. It doesn't know what it's doing anymore. That's why I was trying to tweak it so it's better. It already was doing a bad job at the descriptions. I think was where I found like the first description, it would make a lot of interesting assumptions. And sometimes it would be wild stuff. I'd be like one of my own photos and I'd be like, this is a copyrighted photo by such and such photographer and like this type of thing. And I'm like, well, I'm not even familiar. I've not even heard of that photographer. I'd look them up and I'm like, oh yeah, they do photo, not anything like my photography, but like it was already like hallucinating a little bit about what it was understanding. But so if I got a little bit clearer with how I wanted to analyze the photo, I'm like, just look at the contents of the photo, just describe the contents of the photo. And like, that's it. And so you would, it would be real simple. Like this is a mountain with trees and there's snow and it's off in the distance and some blue sky. And so then what you'd get next would be, it wouldn't look anything like the original because you're obviously saying, I need a picture with mountains and trees and a blue sky. It's like, so it's kind of that playing that game of like, how much do you want it to describe it and how accurately, like saying like, I need you to tell me where everything is placement wise, left and right, top and bottom. And I was like, the fun part is seeing what it comes up with, I guess, and just letting it ride and see what happens.
It's interesting. It's a variation on often in groups for icebreaker type stuff, you would have someone describing something to somebody else and you draw it and you realize, well, I wasn't communicating perhaps as well as I could have because I gave you generalized instructions, but everyone's interpretation of what I said was a little bit different.
Right.
Because I wasn't precise.
I think that was probably like my subconscious inspiration for it. It was like the game of telephone of just like saying, oh, let's do AI telephone, see what happens. But since we have the tools to make pictures and make text from pictures, like you can do this now. So, and I can just do it with.
I mean, I love that. Like you're having it look at something. I mean, that's part of, for me, one of the big steps is allowing, or not allowing, but just creating the opportunity for that spatial awareness. So it's like trying to convey to another quote unquote, mind that exists only in this 2-dimensional or no dimensional space of ones and zeros and digital thought, to understand what it is to move through 3D space. How to interpret that? What does it mean to be a bird in flight? And how do I capture that and capture the spirit of it as opposed to just going through, just sort of grinding through like all of the different images of birds and then trying to come up with something.
Mm-hmm.
But just being able to see, remember, and use that, like, that's where some of these leaps are happening now, where obviously in robotics or self-driving cars, they have to be aware of physics and whatnot. But at what point does that turn from math to understanding? Because we all do advanced statistics when we like run and catch a ball.
Right. Our brain's doing a lot of heavy calculations to figure things out very quickly too, which is impressive.
Yeah, quickly and intuitively. And at what point does it understand what it's doing? Just like I was saying earlier about us understanding what it's doing. When does it truly understand what it is it's being asked to do?
Yeah, I think it's a good question because we know it doesn't right now. At least we assume it doesn't because it doesn't seem like the capabilities are there. It's just this it's a really advanced autocomplete right now. Same with an image. It's like taking that, you were talking about, like taking that static and that diffusion model and just like, I'm going to bubble up an image out of that. I'm going to start putting things randomly in whatever your image square is or whatever shape. And then it's like, okay, well, I put some red there. That must be the shirt because you said this guy has a shirt. So turning those little dials quickly into making an image, kind of along the same way, the way our brain works. Like we see stuff and it's like, what am I seeing? It's this. And then your brain turns it into an image and you see it. And it's crazy to see how there's similarities in how these things function.
So are you running any other experiments that you can share with us tonight?
I mean, like the other stuff that I've just been trying to learn my way around, like ComfyUI right now. It's such a complicated, archaic, like visual tool. Like it's I don't know if you've had any experiment.
No. Tell me all about it. Again, part of this podcast is introducing people to these tools.
So I believe it's like a diffusion based system. It uses existing models and you can pick which model you want. And there's different ones out there that have different training and things like that. But it's you have a lot of like connections and controls and you could actually wire things up together to get results. And they're called like workflows. And there's a lot of people who've been working on these really elaborate, complicated workflows. I'm still at the phase of trying to understand. There's so many new terms like in the AI space. And I know people are just making stuff up because we don't have names for stuff, but it gets like crazy. Like think I just came across yesterday, like, oh, we're using these WAN and now it's like WAN 1.2. And I'm like, I've not even heard of this yet. We're already at 1.2. I'm like, what's going on, guys? So trying to like learn how these things and what they do and how they output. And you can really get into like fine tweaking and getting it to generate images based on not just a prompt, but then also saying like, okay, well, I have this model that I know has this level of expertise. Like this model is great at cars. So then I'm going to give it a prompt based on the car that I want and the scene that I want. And then you have a Laura that says like, this Laura is good at fixing license plates. And you're like, okay, cool. Because that was what wasn't working before. I'm getting garbage for license plates. And so you start to string all these things together to get a really good end result. And it's fascinating just to kind of learn these tools. So I'm experimenting with those right now to see if there's things that I can take advantage of with my other stuff. I mean, I've been using it to create, I think like mostly abstract nonsense stuff that I need for like some of my projects, because there's a demand for creating abstract art. That's not, it's for an internal intranet. Nobody cares. They just want some visual niceness in there. And I'm like, I want some wavy lines. I could sit in Photoshop. I can make wavy lines. I could take my camera and I could go photograph wavy lines, or I can go have my computer generate wavy lines and have it make way better than I probably could have in trying to take a cool picture with like smoke and lights and stuff in like a studio setting. So saving me some time there.
It's interesting you talk about these, pulling together all of these disparate tools. I know that a certain amount of adoption resistance can come from whether it's the nomenclature like you talked about, or like, okay, what is the difference between ChatGPT 4.0, 3.0, 3.0 mini, and now 4.5's out? Like, nobody seems to be able to name anything. It's like we want the one ring to rule them all. Like, just give me the one thing.
Yeah. Well, it's just moving so fast right now. That's the other issue. So many people are putting resources into coming up with new things to solve the problem. Like, we're seeing the birth of a whole new tool sets and industry and everything. So, I mean, it will calm down over time. Just like, I mean, I guess my experience with software is like working in software, it's constantly changing. There was new frameworks and new tools and new languages and new best practices. And you just kind of like, there's all this noise that's constantly happening. And then the best stuff comes out of it at the end.
You used, I think the key word there was birth, that all of this generation is happening around us, coming into the world. And whether it is going to be survival of the fittest or whatever, the evolution of it all, like we're seeking the grand unification theory where it all sort of comes together. And I know that's the promise of, I guess Claude 3.7 was supposed to do this, but people are waiting for ChatGPT 5.0, where it's supposed to be putting together the reasoning with that depth of thought, where it's like, okay, this is where the bicameral brain is being brought together into one, and what is it going to be able to do then? It will feel different, but it's like you said, this is an exciting time. It's just, there's chaos and there's noise, but you sort of have to take that for the beauty of what it is, which is, yeah, I mean, there's profit incentives and all the rest of it, but in the end, you have a lot of really smart people inspired to this burst of creation. I know one podcast I was listening to recently, they were talking about, we tend to think that progress is linear, where one development leads to another and slowly another comes along, where really, it just happens in like these spurts where it's just like, oh, crazy, 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 crazy. Then we learn how to work within that, and then suddenly something else happens and everything goes crazy again.
It's like the science of it. I mean, science works the same way. We discover a new idea, a new theory, or new something, and then everybody iterates on that, and it's an explosion of things happen, and then it calms down, and then we realize we didn't know anything, and we start all over again and kind of start chipping away on the same problems.
One of my favorite science stories when I was in college and taking an astrophysics class, because in another life, if I could have handled the math, I would have gone into astrophysics. It was not to be, among many other things. But I was reading about this scientist who had a breakthrough where it's like it was just a flurry of work and he got in all of this data and none of it made sense. And then he had this moment of clarity where he's like, wait a minute, I've been told all of my life galaxies spin in one direction, but the math here only works out if some of them are spinning in the other direction.
The math is usually the best way to tell the truth.
Yeah, and his whole point was the rest of my life, I will never have that kind of flurry again because I'm going to spend the rest of my career proving it. That was my theory. Now I have to gather all the data with limited amount of telescope time so that I can convince everybody that I'm right. But again, bursts of creation followed by Steady Freddy. So when we come to the end of these podcasts, I tend to like to end in a philosophical place, and we've already touched on it a little bit, about hope and possibility. You've been playing around with, tools that are far beyond my ability to grok, although I'm going to start playing with them. And I chose the word grok intentionally because obviously it is out there. But where does it go from here? In that, you are involved in a great many fascinating things. We didn't even get to talk about, playing around with autonomous robots, but, you're an artist, photography, you code, you create, you build, you experiment, and you've been working these tools into all of that to see what they're capable of and getting a feel for what they are now, what they once were, and what they might be. Where does creativity go from here?
It's a big, heavy question. I don't know the answer to that. I think it's just interesting I've always seen it as that these are just tools. Artists use tools, developers use tools, everybody uses tools. Build houses use tools. This is just more tools to us to help us be more creative and explore more ideas. And maybe they shorten the time frame on things. They shorten the amount of effort so that you can keep pushing the envelope of creativity. And that's how I want to use them, and that's how I hope that they're there for, that they're not taking away from it. They're additive on top.
And I'll just take that into one last question then, because you touched on it there. It is a big sort of heavy question about what is to come, because it's that broad question for all of us. So I'll bring it down. What are you going to be doing? Like if I check in with you in a year, which is something I really want to do with everyone I'm talking to, it's like, okay, the tools are another year down the road. What have you been up to?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I definitely feel like it will be really interesting to see how this stuff is happening over time, because as we talked about, it's happening really fast right now. It might start slowing down. We might start to see some changes of pace on some of these things. Like they'll probably start hitting the walls with efforts. What I want to do with it is just, I want to use these tools to do creative things. Like I want to see, like, can I continue to make cool art? Can I continue to save time and energy? I want to see, like, I'm fascinated where it's going. I mean, until it's its own intelligence, which I kind of feel like that's farther out. To like that, it's going to be like self-aware and all that stuff is maybe a little bit harder than we think, because it feels like it can do it, but it's easy to be fooled. I mean, even the old Eliza fooled people back in the like 60s and 70s. People were like, "Oh my gosh, it's alive," compared to today's, and you're like, no, it was really rudimentary. I mean, people were scared that aliens were invading, in War of the Worlds too. So it's all a matter of, like, as we learn and we become more experienced with these tools, we just become better at understanding them and understanding their limitations, and we just get better at working with them. And it's kind of my takeaway is I just want to get better at using them to do good, cool stuff, and hopefully not feel like people are being like, I don't want people to lose their jobs and stuff either. So it's like, I want to take away from that. I hope that we can empower more people to do this type of creative work and these kinds of cool things.
Yeah, that's my hope as well, is that as much disruption as we are heading into, as systems as they are now aren't quite, like people are going to have to renegotiate what a lot of work looks like. But to me, it just feels like it's liberating the creative impulse, that once you start using these tools, you see what they're capable of. And I don't know that I've felt quite so much like a little kid as I have over the past year playing with these tools where it's like when you get into the creative fields and you start, it can feel sometimes like work, right? And it's like, okay, I know the process of, developing a show or working on a video game, and there's joy and wonder and making discoveries, but it's like, okay, it's a process, and I've done this process before. Then you start playing with these tools. And for me, as I was saying earlier, where it's like I'm not able to draw the way I would love to be able to draw, but suddenly what's in my mind can get extracted and it's on the page in a way that I've never been able to do before. And it's this sense of childlike wonder, like, oh my gosh, I can play and create. How cool is that? Hoping that everybody has that opportunity to see these tools as that gateway to just the wonder of creation.
100%. I mean, it's a revolutionary change in like how we interact with tech. Like that childhood wonder, it reminds me of like my first time using a scanner. Like I want to say it was in the 80s. It was a single line scanner. It could scan a picture. And I remember being like, this is so cool. I can now take something from the real world and put it in a computer, and then I can manipulate it from there. And now it's like I can tell a computer just to make something up entirely. I don't even have to scan it. It's like it already has everything scanned already.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation today. And I am starting to jot down the dates that I talk with people so that as close to that date as I can, a year down the road, we can check in. But this has been fascinating, and I look forward to doing it again a little bit down the road.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on, Andy. And I'm looking forward to just hearing more creatives on your show. Like it's inspiring to hear how different people are using this technology.
Great. Thank you so much. Be well. Thanks for listening to the Creative AI Podcast. If you enjoyed today's episode, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or visit creativeaipod.com.